Hi everybody, welcome to the Week 11 Engage workshop for EU B102. Our topic for this week is pop culture, and you'll know that the reading is chapter 9 of Tate's textbook, and so we're going to go through some activities to open up this topic. So the first is to get us thinking about what pop culture actually is. In Tate's textbook, one of the key ideas that he mentions is that it's certainly not a homogeneous concept. We have to get away from thinking of pop culture as a homogeneous category and that there's only one type of pop culture. I'm sure that you can think of endless different forms of pop culture and different groups and subgroups. And so the images that you can see here are just some indication of the diversity that makes up pop culture. So we're going to have a look at, the social origins of pop culture and the changes over time. And I think that it's really important for us to understand the relevance of pop culture to teaching. So that's where we're going to be going today. I'll give you a moment just to cast your eye over the focus for this week and those myths that you'll recognise from Tate's chapter. Okay, so let's get into it. So there's a definition of pop culture that we can use to unpack a bit more around the topic. So this definition says that popular culture is simultaneously a product of people's imaginations, curiosities, and expressions, and an institution with goals of shaping desires and needs, selling products, and manipulating imaginations and expressions. So we know that there are lots of industries that, sell products and services and images, identities that align with different pop culture groups. But those groups are also a product of what people imagine. So, there's lots of social theories around how, human agency is recursive. And what that means is that our actions and the structures are mutually constitutive. So we use these resources, we use the music, the clothes, the technology, our engagement with sports and news and politics, and we use those to form our identities. And by doing that, we actually, produce those identities and we reinforce them. So it's sort of a cycle that goes around. So here it says popular culture is made as people live in the everyday world, and it is made by people living out their lives and by industries trying to sell people goods. So I wonder if you can think of some of the different products that you see sold. And it's, of course, very interesting to think about, in the age of social media and the enormous influence that that's had on pop culture and the way pop culture is spread globally. And some of the new identities that have been forged as a result of that. You might have seen this floating around social media a few months ago. I was really interested to see this because just a couple of months before it came out, I'd been in China and saw one of these physical activity lessons in a school in China that we visited, and it was far more regimented and straightforward and perhaps more of a normal idea of what it might look like. But this is certainly something very, very different. So I'll pop it on for us to have a look at. Okay, I think you get the idea of what's going on there. I'm just going to see if I can find the version of what I saw when I was in China. And I'll quickly show you that. Okay, I found it. So I'll just quickly show you this just by way of contrast. So you can see that the version that we watched first is definitely a little bit different to the more authentic version of what this class looks like. But of course, our focus here is in thinking about how pop culture has been brought into school. And so we're thinking about some of the reasons that we might actually use pop culture in the classroom. I wonder if you can perhaps pause and have a think about what value pop culture might have in the classroom, and perhaps some of the misconceptions that we might have around whether or not it is actually relevant to what we do as teachers. So there's some ideas here from Alverman et al. So some ideas around how we can use pop culture in the classroom, how we can integrate everyday culture into the classroom. So the first point there, to explore teachers, our knowledge of our own and students' popular culture interests. So to get to understand the interests of our students, and again, thinking about the diversity of interests that there will be in a class of 22, 25, 28 students in your classes, and to use those interests as a jumping off point for your pedagogies, for your content and resources and the way that you engage students. The second point, use children's popular culture interests to make some homeschool connections for linguistically and culturally diverse learners. The third point, use students' popular culture interests to teach reading and language and literature related concepts and skills. And there's just a whole range of things that you can do there. If you happen to be studying English teaching in secondary, there's a whole unit devoted to pop culture, pop literature, and its use in the English classroom. The fourth point, use students' popular culture interests to teach literacy across the curriculum. So you might think about the different ways that you could incorporate pop culture to teach literacy beyond the English classroom, finding ways that you can bring it into all sorts of different curriculum areas. And lastly, use students' popular culture interests to teach critical literacy. And that's something that we'll focus on a little bit here. So there's certainly a whole range of ways that we can link the curriculum to popular ways of life that are recognised socially, and to make links to the current social environment. So here's a bit of a contentious statement for us to consider. There is absolutely nothing of value to be learned from Married at First Sight. So we often hear this in the media that schools are teaching things that are of no relevance, that in the English classroom, as Tate mentions, that we don't teach the canon anymore, and that we teach these silly TV shows, and there's nothing of value in what we do teach when it comes to these more popular culture kinds of texts. So I wonder if you can think whether there might be anything of value to be learned from a reality show like Married at First Sight. I'll give you a moment. I really want you to have a think about what value there could be in showing and talking about Married at First Sight in the classroom. So of course, we could think of it from a genre perspective, so about reality TV, okay, and about its constructedness and the way that it is represented as truth and as accurate, a real, representation of reality. But we can look at the ways that it isn't reality, and all the, everything that goes on in the very careful curation and selection and sequencing of images and of characters, even, from casting of characters for reality TV shows. You mightn't be surprised to know that there has been some academics who've done some thinking around this. So I'm going to hop over to an article from The Conversation. So they talk about it as a social experiment, all but guaranteeing relationship failure. So you might be interested to look that up and have a look at what it has to say. But it does have something to say about the nature of relationships. So perhaps you might, in a health and physical education class, when you're talking about relationships, this could be such an interesting resource to bring into the classroom to generate and stimulate those discussions. Now let's think about popular culture and critical thinking. I'm going to show you a short video, it goes for just over a minute, of a teacher who gives some really sensible and very logical reasoning for including popular culture in the classroom. Okay, here we go.
In any range of any class, you're going to have a range of reading abilities. And the big question with the Common Core even coming in is, how do you teach grade level text to below grade level readers? So a lot of times I like to pull out and tease out themes and then connect popular culture artifacts to support the themes to prepare them for the reading. So it's not uncommon for me to pull in a Rihanna lyric or a Stevie Wonder lyric or a Michael Jackson lyric to get them ready for the actual text that's in the particular lesson. And what I have found is that as I platoon the text with these popular culture references, they have the background knowledge, they're practicing their reading skills, we can start conversations around themes, and they can have a better entry into the text themselves. Now the next step to that is, once we have, the discussions about the themes in both the popular culture and also the text, then we can start critiquing things. And I think the biggest part that will make students successful is making them critical thinkers. If I can put a piece of popular culture in front of them and have them critique its merit and critique what it's doing to society, positively or negatively, then we can start having real conversation. That's that life ready piece again, right? They have the skill of reading, they have the skill of being able to write, but what about critically look at things that they're consuming in society and judge the merit of them? So that's kind of why I bring pop culture in as often as I can.
Okay, so I think that that's an incredibly persuasive case for using popular culture in the classroom. So he says that he looks at the themes of the text and then draws in popular culture to prepare students and put them in a position to be better able to engage with the themes of the text. When I would teach poetry, we would use the song Firework by Katy Perry, which is a little bit atrocious in one way, but at the same time, bringing in that popular culture, something that the students were all very familiar with, was an excellent way of having them understand what a metaphor was. For a period of time, I was able to teach the notion of dependent and independent clauses by talking about Justin Bieber and Selena Gomez's relationship. Again, a little bit sad, but it definitely worked. And probably my favorite of all was teaching advertising. And that was such a rich opportunity to bring in a whole range of advertising texts and media and look at the representations of all sorts of things, of gender. Oh, my mind's gone blank. All sorts of things that we look at, dominant ways of representing things and through the media, okay? And so we could really critique those advertisements and understand the work that they're doing, the discursive work, the visual work that they're doing. So you might have a think about, whatever age you're teaching or what curriculum area you're teaching, how could you bring in popular culture as a way of critique? Okay, bringing in the critical thinking for students via popular culture, something that they're able to relate to and connect with. And there's so many debates to be had around the merit of different forms of popular culture with students. They love having those kinds of conversations. Now, an important thing to think about is how what we do with popular culture might be justified through the teaching standards. So how can you use the theoretical understanding that you're developing this week to justify or rationalize your use of popular culture in the classroom. So how does it connect with the standards? So we're going to have a look at that in a moment. We're going to watch a brief video of a graduate teacher. So like it says here, she's talking about her plans for an English lesson about fairy tales and nursery rhymes and how she uses some popular culture in doing so. So let's have a look. I always get lost when I have to share the screen. You'd think I get better at it. There it is. Okay. Here we go. So it's just a few minutes.
At St Brendan, what kinds of resources? A graduate teacher uses a range of resources, including ICT, to engage students in learning about characters in fairy tales and the emotions they express.
The students are learning to deconstruct the fairy tales in a different way because it's all about that code breaking stuff in the young ages. So they're pulling apart, they're looking at Cinderella and they're looking at the pumpkin and the shoe and the important parts of the story that they could probably recall later on. And I think it's important that they look at all of that and sort of build on it in a different way than just telling the story and leaving it at that, incorporating the ICT. Who am I? No calling out, hands down. I just want you to have a think about it. Who am I? I fell off a wall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put me back together again. Who am I? Hands up if you think you know which fairy tale we could be talking, or nursery rhyme we could be talking about. Arathi. Humpty Dumpty, very good. So we used this sentence here, I fell off a wall, and this is called a prop. We're calling these props or items to show us what was happening in the story to work out who we were talking about. So what we're going to be doing today in our groups is in a moment Miss Lane's going to split you up into groups and you're going to have a turn to use some props and do your own facial expressions and gestures using the digital camera to take some photos.
The teacher organises students to work in groups to answer Who Am I puzzles and to select the prop which corresponds with their character. She supports them to use digital cameras to capture role plays of their characters' emotions. She shares these images via the interactive whiteboard.
When I was teaching the lesson today, I could obviously see the kids were engaged in what they were doing because they were using the technology and taking the digital photos themselves. I think the big thing is that they get to watch it back, whereas if they just did the lesson with the props and that sort of thing in the classroom, the whole experience is just forgotten, whereas now we can go back and we can reflect on what they've done and they can say, okay, so I was looking at the happy smile, and I could see from the responses, oh yes, it's happy, it's smiley, because you can see their teeth and it's arching up. How can we build on that? How can we get the vocab going, linking in the Australian curriculum to try and further them? They're happy, they're excited. So I think if you didn't have that technology to try and reflect on the experiences with especially Year 1 children in a couple of weeks' time, because it's a whole unit's worth of work, it could be forgotten. Whereas now we can draw back on it, we can pop it back up on the whiteboard and they can look at it again and then they can develop it further into photo stories to prompt them. They wanted to use like the voice recorder to say, who am I am, and use those photos again.
How have you used a range of resources?
So that's a really nice example of how the teacher was able to leverage off the students' familiarity with the characters from the fairy tales to explore emotions and how we can represent emotions, and to certainly build on children's understanding of emotions and what they look like and what kinds of feelings there might be associated with the visual appearance of an emotion. So let's have a look at how we can link the use of pop culture in the classroom to the AITSL standards. So I've got them open somewhere over here. Okay, so let's have a look firstly at 3.4. So we're in the plan for and implement effective teaching and learning. So 3.4 is around the selection and use of resources. So you need to demonstrate your knowledge of a range of resources, including ICT, that engage students in their learning. And you could certainly make a case for the use of certain forms of popular culture in the classroom in terms of being appropriate resources to use for students. Another that I mentioned, let's go to 2.5, was around literacy and numeracy strategies. So no one understands literacy and numeracy teaching strategies and their application in teaching areas. Now, we know that using popular culture can certainly feed into some literacy. So, you know, literacy is an incredibly broad thing. We don't just need to think of literacy in terms of being able to read and write. Having that visual literacy, having a critical literacy of the way the texts are positioning us, what they're representing, what messages they're sending their viewers and readers and listeners. So this will certainly give you a broader way to engage students in different forms of literacy. Let's look at 1.2, so understanding students and how they learn. So the understanding students demonstrate knowledge and understanding of research into how students learn and the implications for teaching. And we can certainly make a very strong argument around the value of engaging students in their learning through popular culture. One more that we might look at is 2.1, the content and teaching strategies of the teaching area. So demonstrating knowledge and understanding of the concepts, substance and structure of the content and teaching strategies of the teaching area. And again, it could be very possible to make some links there to the value and use of popular culture in a variety of teaching areas, as we've discussed today. And I'm sure that you'll have some ideas as well. So that's where we're going to move to now. So there's a question here for you. How might you teach the key concepts of a unit of study using popular culture? So what you could do is go to the Australian curriculum and look up 1 or 2 or 3 content descriptors and think about, well, if this was what I was teaching, if this was part of a unit of work, how could I bring in some popular culture to support that learning, to create some resources that do draw on sources of popular culture, whether it be news, sports, TV, movies, music, fashion, technology, politics. So what would be appropriate for the year level that you're teaching, and what would be relevant to the key concepts, to the skills, to the knowledge that you're teaching. So your task for this week is to sum up all the information to form an argument responding to this. So remember that we're giving you a little bit of practice for the exam. So this statement, pop culture, should be used in the classroom. So you might think about some different policies. You might think about the APSL standards, the pros and cons, and the barriers to using popular culture in the classroom. On the week 11 Padlet, you will see a place for you to put your responses. So that's with the whole cohort, it's not just the external group. So you might like to draw on Tate's chapter as well as a source of literature and pull out some of those key ideas from his chapter. So that is all that we have for today. I'm just going to go back to the start, and I just want to mention a couple of things before we finish. The first is thank you to the couple of students who've contributed to the discussion board around alternative education. So there were a couple of consistent ideas across the responses. And so I've responded to both of those and tried to further your thinking a little bit there. You will have all by now received your results for the first assignment. So please do take the time to go through the feedback that I've offered and think about what you might take from that into the exam. And lastly, the week 12 tutorial workshop, Engage workshop, I'm going to spend some time focusing on preparations for the exam. So I'm going to go through what I can tell you about the exam and also spend some time perhaps upskilling you on some of the areas that were weaknesses in the first assignment, particularly things around structure and referencing. Okay, I understand that this is the first semester of uni, and so we've certainly been very understanding in that regard. We've tried to give you feedback around those areas, but we do want to support you to improve your skills and your knowledge of how to function effectively in an academic environment. So there'll be more details there. If you do have any questions about your first assignment, I'm more than happy to hear from you. And group leaders, please make sure that you have distributed those results to your group members. So I hope you all have a great week. Remember to make the most of this opportunity here to respond to what is designed to be a sample exam question. Pop culture should be used in the classroom. So think very carefully about a structure for your argument. So what is your thesis? What is your overall argument? And what are your perhaps 2 or 3 sources of, well, sub-arguments, okay? And what's your sources of evidence to support those arguments? And post something as detailed as you like to the Padlet. Okay, thanks everybody. See you next week.